Good morning, or should I just say hi? Fellow ruminators, welcome back to another session, Rumination with Andrew. It is a distinct pleasure to be with you one more time to discuss a very important topical matter. And lots of things are happening around the world, right? Including the Caribbean region and Latin America, United States, and all around the world. We have some interesting events unfolding right before our eyes. And it's very important that we become aware of these situations, these events as they unfold, right? And that we also educate ourselves because too often we are caught up in minor issues, talking about nationalities. We're so patriotic that sometimes we blind our eyes to what is really happening in the world. And in today's conversation, we shall be looking briefly, and let me just here suggest briefly, that is the underlying word, because sometimes we tend to think that my videos go in depth into lots of what is happening. I can't, right? And I can't say lots of what I would like to say because of the suppression of speech on this platform. You've got to understand that we're living in a different world, a world where freedom is not necessarily the order of the day, right? It's very important that we understand that. I think sometimes we think we are living in normal times, all right? And we're not living in normal times. As I've suggested many times, we are living in abnormal times, times in which we've got to be reflective. And I dare say that we should read more, think more, and talk less. And that's for me. Notice I said we, because we are not reading and thinking enough. We tend to talk a lot. We read an article here and there, and we think we know based on the reading of two articles. But when you're reading on subjects as important as what I am about to talk about, you've got to read as many books and articles that you can lay your hands on, because you'll find yourselves just tethering yourself to a particular narrative. It's very important that we understand that our world is built on many narratives, and we have got to understand as many as we can. We've got to expose ourselves to many of the narratives so that we can educate ourselves and we can make an informed decision. Hope I've made that very, very clear. This particular video will be talking about Barbados's crime bill. And that has been in the news since, based on what I'm reading, from 2015. Could be before too, right? That has been in the news in terms of cybercrime, averting cybercrime in Barbados. But one of the things we need to understand is that this is not going to be a Barbadian problem, right? Because already they're talking about regional cooperation in terms of this Barbadian crime bill. And that bill is just about to be passed in the Barbadian parliament. So it's something that is current and something that we should be aware of. Thank you, Barbadians, for correcting me that Barbados is not located in the Caribbean Sea, it's located in the Atlantic Ocean, right? And many of you have spent time on that correction without also spending more time grasping some of the things I was talking about in terms of your democratic rights and the health of your democracy, as it were, or your republic in Barbados. You did not really give me compelling arguments. Some of you were, well, making your comparisons between Jamaica and Barbados. That is an inferior approach, right? That is an inferior approach. I do not I am not lowering my standards to have this Barbadian, Trinidadian, Guyanese, or whatever competition. I'm here to divulge facts, right? And to allow you to prod your minds to think. I'm not going to be engaged in an inferior warfare over who is superior, because none is superior or inferior, right? That is nonsense, and it's time for us to grow up and to understand that we have bigger fish to fry, rather than talking about this who is culturally superior and who is more educated and who has a better economy and all of this nonsense, right? Because we are about to see that we are in a serious crisis, right? Crisis that I'm not sure how we are going to extricate ourselves out of these intractable problems. And these problems are worldwide, right? They are just not in the Caribbean region or in Latin America or in the United States. they are global problems. And these problems, our politicians are telling us day by day that they have the solutions. And oftentimes, if we should just take a peek into history, even recent history, we see that the governments have not been able to solve a lot of the problems that we're having, whether it's crime and violence that we see on the land. Now they're talking about cyber crimes and that they have the solutions to solve and to put a dent on cybercrime and cyberbullying and all of that nonsense, right? They do have the solutions. And every time we take a look at history, we see that they do not have the solutions. In fact, a lot of times when they attempt to solve these problems, the problems worsen, right? The problems often become graver, right? So these are issues that should be of major concern to every citizen in the world. Now, let us begin with New Nation. Is it New Nation? Let me see here. I think it is New Nation. No, this is National Observer. Let me get here. I have a bit of things here on my screen. So please be, I did not get that news from the New Nation. Yes, this is Nation News, not New Nation, but Nation News, all right? So I was miscalling, as it were, the name. All right, so let me share my screen with you and share this piece of information. Remember now that this is not an in-depth discussion on this topic. You've got to do your own research, but I am sensitizing your minds as to what is happening. And this article is entitled, Cattle Calls Out Bajans Over Malicious Sharing of Information. And this is an editor's pick, and this was dated on January 30th, 2024. Minister of Industry, Innovation and Trade, Marshall Cadell, has called out Barbadians for the malicious dissemination of information online. This was done during yesterday morning's discussion of the Cybercrime Bill 2023 in the opening session of the House of Assembly. Cadell said that she believes that Barbadians have regrettably gotten to a place where they have scant respect for information, which means, therefore, that you have to be careful what you disseminate on the internet, because that can be described as cybercrime. So if you disperse or if you disseminate information that can be offensive or that might be deemed to be offensive, it means, therefore, that you can be fined, right? And oftentimes when we say offensive, it's information that is not politically correct, right? Information that is not politically correct. And we've got to be careful, because very soon we are not going to be able to speak freely online. Now, listen to what she's saying. Just because I get sent something on my phone does not mean that it passes the test of that which should be transferred. And to some extent here, she's right, but how are you going to determine what is to be transferred and what not to be transferred? Because something that might be offensive to you might not be offensive to me. So this is quite ambiguous how they are actually expressing themselves here. That which should be shared with a third party, or that which should be the subject of wide discussion, she explained. I fear that because information is so accessible, we almost feel like hitting send absolves us from any responsibility. But what responsibility? And shouldn't there be laws if somebody is offended by what we say? Shouldn't they be able to take up that in a court of law? Right? And if it bears any semblance of disparaging a person's character, right, then the person will be held accountable. But when our governments, from the executive power, are going to tell us what we can do, what we can say, what information we can share with each other, that is something that is dangerous. And we are aware that there are dangers on the internet, right? Nobody is denying that fact. Right? We are not debunking that that is not true, right? But the response to dealing with such and to correcting such misuse of information is not what I think people will find palatable. She also informed the House that the Law Reform Commission adjudged the Computer Misuse Act of 2005 to be woefully inadequate for 2024 and beyond. That assessment was made after it was deemed that the Act didn't factor in addressing cybercrime cause for legislative response to the newest in technology and technological approaches, and to the extent that it must allow for national cooperation in matters where physical boundaries do not exist. Right? So she's suggesting that the crime law, the cybercrime law in 2005 was not effective, to meet the realities of 2024 and beyond. Something that we should be aware of. The Cybercrime Bill 2023, if passed, will provide for the combating of cybercrime and the protection of legitimate interests in the use of and development and in information technologies. It will also allow the facilitation of international cooperation in computer-related crimes and related matters. The bill outlines prohibited conduct that will be punished if found guilty. Malicious communications, such as what was discussed by Minister Marsha Cadell, would warrant a punishment of a fine of $70,000, right? I'm not sure if I'm sure it probably is that Barbadian dollars, or imprisonment for a term of 7 years or both. The legislation defines it as a person who intentionally or recklessly uses a computer system to publish, broadcast, or transmit computer data that intimidates a person, threatens to use violence towards them or a family member, or damage the property of a person or the property of their family. Now, we do know that people often say things even though they do not mean them. A lot of us do that, right? And that could be interpreted as a threat, right? Because a lot of times when people get us angry, we do say things that we are embarrassed. After much reflection, we say, wow, I should not have said that. Or we might make a comment and say, wow, I should not have said that. I didn't really mean that, right? But the fact of the matter is that we're living in a free world. And once we are not going to act upon what we're thinking, then I think that the government should not necessarily have any sort of power over our very thoughts, unless we translate our thoughts into action. Then they could therefore act. Because of course, if we're killing someone, and if we really, really put our thoughts into action, the government has to take some sort of, punitive, they have to really respond to protect their citizens, right? That is the purpose of government, but not to control our thoughts. Now, here this cyberbullying is an offense that would be punishable by a fine of $70,000 or prison sentence for a term of 7 years or both. It was defined as a person who intentionally uses a computer system to publish, broadcast, and transmit data that is offensive, right? What does offensive mean? Because what is offensive to you might not be offensive to me. And yeah, if it's offensive, yeah, so what? It's free speech. Pornographic, indecent, vulgar, profane, obscene, or of a menacing character, or causes any data to be so sent. Next one, for the purpose of causing annoyance, inconvenience, danger, obstruction, embarrassment. Embarrassment. So what if, yeah, you should be embarrassed, because sometimes people ought to be embarrassed for them to recognize that they did commit something, some crime, or whatever they might have done. Sometimes embarrassment is something that is a strategy, is a method that should be used. Isn't that so? Insult, injury, humiliation, intimidation, hatred, anxiety, or causing substantial emotional distress to that person. How oftentimes, even when reading your Bible, that we have this sense of embarrassment, right? Or even insult, especially when we know that we have been convicted of a sin that we should not have done, right? We feel embarrassed. So even the Bible very soon will be forbidden, because it is going to unveil our sins, and people might feel offended, or they might feel inconvenienced by the truth, right? Or they might feel embarrassed. right? We've got to really be alert about what is happening with this cybercrime bill that is about to be passed, if not yet passed, in Barbados, in the Barbadian Parliament. It also tackles child groomers, defining them as a person who intentionally or recklessly uses a computer system to befriend, manipulate, communicate with, or establish a connection with a child in order to abuse a child, whether sexually or otherwise. Now, if they can prove this, of course, these persons should be dealt with by the law. But what, again, I'm saying sometimes the wording is ambiguous and we don't know how this will be played out as far as the government here is expressing, is guilty of an offense and is liable on conviction on indictment. Now, the punishment for individuals found guilty of this offense is a fine of $100,000, and I'm sure this is Barbadian dollars, the Barbadian currency, or to imprisonment for a term of 10 years or to both. I see that the imprisonment is really, really, is very, very long. 7 years, 10 years, that's a lot of time in prison, right? In the case of a corruption, no, sorry, in the case of a corporation, to a fine of 250,000 Barbadian dollars, right? 250 Barbadian dollars. This is a response from somebody who says, to tell the truth, she did not want to be the bearer of bad news. Look at her face. She is not happy about this either, right? So I'm sure they're talking about Cattle, Marsha Cattle here of Barbados. Now, this is a piece of information that came from Send Kits. That is, before we go to Send Kits, let me see if I could go here to change.org, right? So the change.org is saying here, they're trying to pose counter arguments against this Barbadian cybercrime bill. And it says, amend the Barbados Cybercrime Bill 2024 and remove the risk of human rights violation, right? And it says the concerns, broad powers, the Cybercrime Bill grants courts and law enforcement extensive authority to seize individuals' computer devices and compel access on the threat of charges for non-compliance. Look at the telecommunication company compliance. It allows courts and law enforcement to compel telecom companies like Digicel or Flow to provide information location data from cell towers, internet browsing activity, and metadata from phone calls without sufficient legal justification. And when I kept reading this, right, as I read this, I remembered what laws there, the laws in the United States, the Patriot Act, right? The Patriot Act that was written immediately after 2001. It's almost like it's coming directly from that Patriot Act bill that was passed in the United States Congress. So we have privacy breaches and the risk of data misuse. Telecommunication companies can be mandated to retain and archive customer usage data, including information facilitating user identification, details regarding the content of information systems, and data associated with the equipment utilized. These companies can possess comprehensive records of all user activities, encompassing phone calls, text messages, visited websites, and applications accessed on smartphones and computers. So we are going to be surveilled, right? Barbadians will be surveilled to the teeth, right? They will not be free citizens in terms of searching the internet, right? The internet might be well, the ability to use the internet might be something that can allow you to pay huge fines or to go to prison, right? Something that Barbadians have to be very careful of and be aware of too, and not be so much caught up in this act of patriotism. We're Barbadians and we are better than the other, right? That's absolutely nonsense. Remember now that this is not only happening in Barbados, it's happening in the United States, it's happening in England, it's happening all around the world. Wake up. Harsh penalties. We have offenses under the bill carry hefty fines up to $70,000 and or 7 years of incarceration. This includes using a computer system to transmit offensive or indecent data, causing annoyance, inconvenience, danger, or substantial emotional distress. I don't have to go through all of that. I will attach the link below the description, right? So this is just sensitizing you to what is happening in Barbados. And this cybercrime bill, that seems to be a bill that is going to erode a lot of civil liberties, right? This is going to be a complete erosion of what we understand freedom of speech to entail or to mean, right? So we need to be aware of these measures as much as possible. Now, this came from the national, is it the Observer? This is St. Kitts and Nevis, and in the Observer, this was written recently, well, Thursday. Today is Thursday, right? May 16, 2024. It's right. I didn't even see the date, right? The article is today's article, right? That was written, right? On May 16th, 2024, and Bridgetown, Barbados. The Barbados government has announced plans to establish a national cybersecurity strategy to provide the island with a robust cyber defense as it seeks to deal with crime. Attorney General Adriel Brathwaite, addressing the first conference of the Department of Public Prosecutions, said the new framework would include revision and revamping of legislation to provide the required security. He told delegates to the conference that is being held under the theme strengthening our capacity to combat cyber crimes and other organized crimes, that the new strategy would involve work on the Computer Mouse Act, the Electronics Transactions Act, and the Telecommunications Act, and the Copyright Act. Brathwaite also hinted at the possibility of new legislation being introduced, such as the Interception of Communications Act, to strengthen efforts being undertaken. Now listen to what he's saying, or she, I think is it a he or she? What's her name? Adriel, is it a man or a woman? Now, Barbadians can correct me. What we're faced with as a region and as a country. So they're saying what we're faced with as a region. So this is not only going to be about Barbados. It's a regional problem. And may I suggest, this is a global problem. What we are faced with as a region and as a country is real. We have seen more cyber-related attacks on our government infrastructure and on our private infrastructure. We must be on the cutting edge in terms of our defense, he said, noting that the telecommunications unit was presently working to ensure Barbados had a more secure cybersecurity platform. Right? So this is a regional problem which require regional approach, right? And don't be surprised if this bill is not also being discussed in Parliament around the different Caribbean countries, right? I'm sure that that is happening in Jamaica, in Guyana, in St. Kitts and Nevis, all around, right? This act or this, law is going to be implemented, right? It is going to be implemented. It's not an if, it is when it will be implemented. Now, listen, one of the ways in which you would prevent cybercrime is by making sure your system is as cyber secure as possible. They like to use these words, security, in the interest of national security, in the interest of cyber security. And what we find every time they tell us about we're secured, we find that we are less secure. The more they try to secure us, we find that the citizens feel less secure, right? That is what is the irony. And we've got to be aware of these things. Oftentimes we're not, because we listen to the media and the media tell us all nonsense and we just embrace whatever they say. Oh yes, according to what they say. Who said? You've got to do your own research and stop telling me about who said and what you understand from what, because the media is controlled. And a lot of times they're so hypocritical that you don't even know what side they're on. They take sides when it suits them, when it's convenient to them. Now, he said, not noting that the security patches for computers should be kept up to date. Acting Police Commissioner Oral Williams told the conference that the time, I would think, has come. It can't be he time. The time has come, that was an error, for consideration to be given to witness protection legislation in Barbados and the provision of safe houses with the appropriate rules and regulations in place. I think at this stage, we in Barbados are fortunate to have among us members of the public who are still willing to come forward and tell the courts what they have or what they have observed, right? So this means, therefore, your neighbor can spy on you and will tell the courts whatever they have observed, right? However, I have also been advised that there are other persons who come forward and give the information but are reluctant to give written statements to the police, and they are unwilling to come to court for fear of reprisals, he said, adding that this practice needed to be remedied with serious administrative and criminal sanctions. Something that is interesting, right? Something that is interesting. And I think that Barbadians and other members of the Caribbean region and the world at large should be concerned about this cybercrime bill, right? Because there are lots of vague expressions, a lot of ambiguities in this document, and we've got to be aware of these ambiguities and begin to challenge our governments about the erosion of our civil liberties. Because once we have lost freedom of expression, there goes all our liberties. There goes all the liberties that we have ever fought for in this Western civilization, in this Western society, or in these Western societies, these Western nations, right? There will be a complete erosion of our civil liberties if we lose freedom of expression, right? And freedom of expression really means the freedom of conscience too, because it means to express your ideas according to how you feel, right? It might not be truthful. What you're saying might not even make any sense, right? But that is your fundamental rights. That is your fundamental freedom to be able to express yourself, right, according to the dictats, right, of your own conscience, right? You should have that ability because that is what it entails. That is what freedom of expression is all about, right? And very soon we are seeing where our governments are working laboriously to bring about a complete erosion of these values that we hold so dear. Now, you know, it's very interesting because the more we learn, and there is a verse that I want to look up. Yeah, I didn't put it on my screen, but that comes from Ecclesiastes. Let me look up the book Ecclesiastes, and that's chapter 1. And it's a Bible verse that I've always I think I prefer the King James version than the other version. So let me put here King James version, KJV. So I have it here, and it is from Ecclesiastes 1 verses 17 and 18. And listen to what the Solomon is saying, right? The wise man is saying. And I gave my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceived that this also is vexation of spirit. And verse 18 is a verse that I've always contemplated on. In Ecclesiastes 1 verse 18, he says here, for in much wisdom is much grief, and he that increaseth knowledge increaseth sorrow. I repeat that. For in much wisdom is much grief. That means the more wisdom you acquire is the more that you're going to have a sorrowful soul. Not that you're going to walk around looking sad, but you are going to understand that the world in which we live is not a happy place. And he that increaseth knowledge increaseth sorrow. Right? So all of this happiness in the world, and you're living in this utopia, right? In this great utopia called Barbados or Jamaica or the United States and England. And yeah, long live the Queen, right? Because we are little England and all of that nonsense. You're going to see that all of that is, is fluff, right? Stuff of no substance. Because if you contemplate and you begin to reflect on the real events happening in our world, you're going to say, my God, this is a wicked world, right? This is an evil world. And we're not heading into better times. We're not heading into happy times. We're going to have happy days. That is not going to happen. Not with the devil living here, right? Because his major quest, as the Bible says, is to kill and to steal and destroy your happiness and your life and your livelihoods and your nation states that you so adore, right? His major quest, if God gives him that permission tomorrow, is to destroy everything right here on planet Earth, right? And God is going to allow him eventually to do it, right? God is going to allow him to destroy a whole lot because of our wickedness and his, not being able to keep his Holy Spirit with us for too long, because that's what was happened to the people of the antediluvian world, right? When they rebelled against God, God's Spirit was removed from that age, right? From those people, and they were finally destroyed. Only Noah and his family, we know that story, were saved. Now, let's now look at this, statement from Ellen White, and she has here counsels for the church. I think this might be volume 9, I believe, but don't quote me on that. I think this is from counsels for the church, and this is chapter 2. Let me share my screen with you, and we shall read this very important statement that she made. And these are insights that God gave to her. And these, when you read these statements, you really wonder if she were actually living in our days. She must have seen them when God, showed her these thoughts. Now, we are living in the time of the end, and that is true. The fast-fulfilling signs of the times declare that the coming of Christ is near at hand. The days in which we live are solemn and important. The Spirit of God is gradually but surely being withdrawn from the earth. Plagues and judgments are already falling upon the despisers of the grace of God. The calamities by land and sea, the unsettled state of society, the unsettled, I want you to really pay attention to these words, the unsettled state of society, or societies are unsettled. The alarms of war are portentous. They forecast approaching events of the greatest magnitude. The agencies of evil are what? Combining their forces and what? Consolidating. What did she say here? The agencies of evil. You don't have these where you think, oh, these are good guys and they're trying to land you into the land of milk and honey, right? They're trying to transition you there where you will have great times and you go to your parties and you go to your soca parties and your dancehall parties and you feel good, right? That's not what is happening, because the enemy of souls is not here to build. He's here to kill and to steal and to destroy. And I'm saying to you, when God removes his protective elements, we are going to see what the enemy is all about. They are strengthening for the last great crisis. Great changes are soon to take place in our world, and the final movements will be rapid ones, right? Great changes are soon to take place in our world. Great changes. Changes that are going to shake you up because you will not be able to believe what you're seeing. The condition of things in the world shows that troublous times are right upon us. The daily papers are full of indications of a terrible conflict in the near future. Bold robberies are frequent occurrence, right? So we see a lot of robberies happening, including the cyber crimes that we're talking about. Strikes are common, thefts and murders are committed on every hand. Men possessed of demons are taking the lives of men, women, and little children. Men have become infatuated rather, with vice, and every species of evil prevails. Right? May I read it again? Men have become infatuated with vice, and every species of evil prevails. Every species of evil prevails. And if you read Genesis 6, that's the same thing that the Bible said. Right? That man's heart, there was nothing that he had in his heart that he would not do. Every thought, every human imagination he wanted to enact in real life. There's nothing, everything evil was what he wanted to really do. And that's what the word, she's saying, every species of evil prevails. The enemy, which is the devil, has succeeded in perverting justice. So the enemy is perverting justice, and what we have now, these cybercrime laws, right? Perversion of justice. And in what? Filling men's hearts with desire for selfish gain. Justice standeth afar off, the truth is fallen in the street, and equity cannot enter. Right? So all of this cybercrime bill, and yeah, they're trying to bring justice to the people. You are going to find out that it is a perversion of real or true justice. In the great cities, there are multitudes living in poverty and wretchedness, well nigh destitute of food, shelter, and clothing, while in the same cities are those who have more than heart could wish, who live luxuriously, spending their money on richly furnished houses, like in Haiti and many other large cities also, on personal adornment, or worse still, upon the gratification of sensual appetites, upon liquor, tobacco, and other things that destroy the powers of the brain. All right? Unbalance the mind and debase the soul. The cries of starving humanity are coming up before God, while by every species of oppression and extortion, men are piling up colossal fortunes. Listen what she says. By every species of oppression, including slavery and extortion, men are piling up colossal fortunes. So even these type of crimes that we talk about, and people are losing millions of dollars from their, not say millions, but lots of money from their accounts, from their bank accounts. We don't know who controls these cybercrime activities, right? We don't know. And sometimes we think they're of men who are just poor and impoverished, and they're not educated, they're not sophisticated. But I dare challenge you that a lot of times it comes from the top, right? It comes from the top because men are trying to hoard up wealth so that they can steal the wealth and they can live luxurious life, as Ellen White suggested here, while many people are suffering, right? And we see that, we witness that every day happening in our major cities, right? And the stark difference between the rich and the poor, between the have and the have-nots. haves and the have-nots, I should say, right? There is a stark difference between the haves and the have-nots. Something that we've got to really pay attention to. And when we see these things, we know that what's going to happen. Look at what is happening to Haiti. That's what is there, right? You have these people, one class of people living elegant and this elevated lifestyle, very wealthy, right? They have obscene wealth, while the masses of people are suffering. And look at the anarchy, because that is going to be what many of our states wind up being like, right? Because there is not going to be, as we are looking at, we are witnessing right now, there is not going to be a day when the elites decide that they're going to share the wealth with us. In fact, behind the scenes, they are extorting, right? And they are taking the wealth of many people, impoverishing even the middle class. We'll find ourselves or in that situation where we too will be impoverished. And you'll have just the what? The haves and the have-nots. So this crime bill is something that the Barbadians have to be aware of, and they have to be alert about, and begin to share this information, begin to do your research, and not just to listen to the arguments or just one narrative, right? You've got to read and you've got to listen to as many sources so that you can enlighten your minds and that we can become more empowered as a people in the region. Remember now that it's not just about Barbados. This is about the regional problem. It's a global problem. And as I suggested, this seems to have come straight from the Patriot Act that the United States produced just after 9/11. Thank you so much for joining. I hope that you will like and you will share and you subscribe and you will try to become a thinking person, right? A lot of things, as Ecclesiastes suggested, you are going to be sorrowful about. The more knowledgeable you become, the more wise you get. A lot of things that you took for granted and you thought that this was the way things should be, and you realize that that's not the way they are, then you are going to become sorrowful. Right? And a lot of the people that you respect. And I'm not saying now that you should go out and disrespect people, but be careful of not idolizing systems and people because you are going to be disappointed. All the best to you. All the best. Bye-bye.